So, welcome to PhD with Woman on IT Hack the Future. My name is Beata Young, and today's PhD Positivity Hack delivered will be by our guest, Tovia Va'aelua. Topic: Using Technology for Social Good. Episode 121 starts here. Let me remind you, this is a grassroots community that focuses on women on IT, an inclusive forum of women in technology, startups, and female leaders who are supported by men as well. And I bring heart to that hustle because empathy is my motto. And empathy is critical when you are using technology for social good. We are looking into the future because Tovia is actually based in New Zealand, completely different sphere and different time zone. So let's imagine it's 15th of November and we actually remember the 15th of November 1971 when the first advertisement for a microprocessor, the Intel 4004, appears in the journal Electronic News. The chip was designed by a four-person team at Intel, a startup company founded by Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce a few years earlier. Intel engineers Federico Fagin, Ted Hoff, Stan Mazer, and Masatoshi Shima designed the 4004 while undertaking a custom circuit design for Bascom, a Japanese calculator maker. There you go. And let's go back to the future because we are recording today's live stream and we are going to talk about using technology for social good. In a world where technology plays an increasingly integral role in our lives, harnessing its power for social good is more important than ever. Join us in this episode for an engaging exploration of how technology can be a force for positive change. Our special guest, not ghost, he's here in person. Tovia is a seasoned tech professional. He will be sharing his remarkable journey from his early days with Microsoft to leading the way for social good initiatives. Tovia's passion for serving underprivileged communities through technology has driven his inspiring trajectory. Tovia's current role leading Crayon's environmental, social, and governance practice in Asia Pacific region showcases his dedication to furthering positive social impact. So, Tovia, where in the world are you today and what time is it with you?
Uh, Good evening from New Zealand, Beata. It is just after 10 p.m. Over here in the evening, and it's good to be here. So,
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's 9 a.m. In London at the moment where I'm joining you from, and hopefully the weather will be fine. I mean, at least for our live stream and for our recording. So,
mm.
speaking of the weather, what season is it with you right now?
Well, it's meant to be heading into end of spring, heading towards summer, but it is still very cold here.
Hmm.
And it's sort of either sometimes warm, sometimes cold, but predominantly cold at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, I can't help but notice your amazing collection of shoes and suits and outfits. So I was just thinking about, I've got a competition there. Anyway, we are talking about social good. So I guess, Tovia, you also are mending your clothes, judging from your collection, and not necessarily buying new. I actually have been recently in a museum in Holland where I had to pick one card. To do social good in terms of fashion. And my card was saying 3 months without buying new clothes. So definitely. That was social good for
Well
for
done.
thank you very much for the fashion industry. However, we will be focusing on the technology side of things.
Mm.
So I would like to ask you, so how technology is being used for social good?
Um, it's a good question, and I think it's when we think about technology, and increasingly what we're discovering is that technology is becoming more and more prevalent, irrespective of the industry that people operate in. Um, if we take, for example, you know, the garment industry, I think just some of the technological advances there, where um, people, it's still in its early stages, but garments that now come with which are sensory based. Imagine a garment that you buy that then allows you to that actually records the number of times that you wear it, and let's say as part of that purchase, you give up your email address to the retailer that you bought it from. So now they have your email details, and you're wearing that garment. And let's say the garment was designed for 150, you know, um, you know, being worn 150 times, or a set X amount of washes, and then once you hit that point, your email suddenly gets you receive something in your inbox saying, "Hey, here's the latest version or the next iteration of that." So, when we look at technology is it's being embedded into a whole number of different things, and especially in the for purpose, not for profit or non-profit space, where we see a lot of people doing amazing things, great things, good things, to improve community, quality of life, etc. But we also know that technology can help to um, ease the burden of efficiency, allowing people to think, how do we do this a smarter way, as opposed to you know, you know, how do we continue down this manual road of doing, lists, written lists, etc., etc. So that's a very basic approach, but obviously it becomes more and more complex, with the advent of artificial intelligence, your different realities, whether it's mixed, virtual, or augmented. There's a whole number of different areas that are coming to play now, which aren't just isolated in the commercial or the enterprise space. They're becoming more and more prevalent in, your small businesses, but also in your non-profit areas, which is where I and my team focus a lot on. So.
Well, I have to mention here Professor Gunnar Stephenson. We did a topic of discussion, which was his project called Education in a Suitcase. And
Mm,
that was definitely bringing education and technology into underprivileged regions or in Africa, especially
awesome.
those regions that do not even have a network and access to the internet.
Yeah.
So, Tovia, I know that you've been working on social good. What inspired you to
Mhm.
go into this topic?
Great question. I think for me, having been in the technology sector now for, I think this is my 25th year, coming into my 25th year, I came to the realization that there was, um, as someone who was born in a little island of a population of 200,000 in the South Pacific, I came to the realization that there's very few people like myself from my community actually working in in the technology space. And so that was my first part, was really just to try and encourage others like myself, other boys and girls, to really get into technology. And then I started, expanding a little bit more and looking at more community, serving underprivileged communities, and then thinking even more so about, okay, then how do we close, the often talked about digital divide, or that digital gap, and that sort of really came to the fore when my wife and I and our children, we moved, and we lived in the Philippines for 9 years. And you then come to realize that the problems, whilst the challenges might be slightly different, it all came down to that the big issue of accessibility, and helping people to be able to have that accessibility to, whether it's technology, devices, or even programs and processes. And so that's what I started doing. Even whilst I was with Microsoft during the weekends, I'd try and spend time, working volunteering my time as either a strategy, helping to build strategies with some nonprofits or foundations, etc. And then I got to a point where I wanted to spend more and more time, actually more time doing that and less time doing work. And so I was, I guess, very blessed to be able to get to a position where I was given the option to actually stay in the organization that I'm in, where I was currently, but to be able to actually carve out a different um, uh, roadmap or pathway. And hence the reason why we created the division, Tech for Good, within the company that I'm with, Crayon, which is a Norwegian company based out of Oslo. And this has been my focus, is just to really bring to the fore the importance of making technology accessible, but also more um, utilized as an enabler for amazing organizations, amazing for-purpose non-profit organizations, to be able to accelerate their goals and milestones, and achieve the outcomes that they envisage for their organizations. So yeah, does that answer the question? If it does,
I think so, absolutely. Well, it is
Hmm.
quite interesting because I've been working with various organizations, I mean, non-profit organizations, and most of them are lacking structure, or they are a bit disorganized,
Hmm.
even though they are called organizations. So, Tovia, I wanted to know
Hmm.
from your experience, what would be the three major things you want organizations to focus on in terms of technology to achieve the social good?
Um, so the way that we approach it is, is we or at least in our organization, in our team, what we focus on is three simple steps. The first one is really what we call connecting the cable. And it's sort of like a little bit of a play, in my early days in tech, I used to run the tech support team. And believe it or not, they you'd often overhear them asking the question, "Is it plugged in?" Right? And can you see a light on? And so, connecting the cable is really about going down to the fundamentals. But it's not the fundamentals. Not nothing as simple as plugging something in. When we talk about connecting the cable, we're talking about some, what I believe to be quite serious, which is, how are you securing the data that you hold? If you are the domestic violence management systems for the region, How are you protecting the data of those victims, of those people who are either living in homes or they've actually reached out to you to get some assistance and guidance and support? How are you protecting that data? How are you ensuring that all of your staff are operating on the same common platform and follow the same common protocols to ensure that your organizational data, information, programs, etc., are all secure and operational? Because that's the most critical piece, right? And in one organization that we were dealing with, who does service that particular region by way of family and domestic violence. They have a total of 324, I think, staff, but 83% of them are volunteer. Right. So then you think about it. So then if you've got 83% of people coming in with different devices, and they're coming in with different, my own phone, the whole BYOD, bring your own device approach suddenly can become a little bit tenuous, a little bit chaotic, to your point. And so then what we try and do is say, how get everyone on a common platform. And if there are organizations out there, Microsoft does it for free, Google does it for free, where they offer through programs like Tech for Social Impact, where you can get licenses for free to get your whole organization onto a common platform, right? So that part is important. The next part is then thinking about, now that everything is secure, how do you start getting better information? How are you gaining more, better real-time information even? Because a lot of the time people try and do things, but they're not actually working with brand new information, or their programs don't have that telemetry that focuses or sends back the information in order for them, or the data, in order for them to improve the programs. And so it's important that you're able to gather that information. Now, one key critical piece that I will call out here is think about the way that you capture that information. We're doing some work with some guys who are a team that looks after return services, so war veterans. And if you understand, that these individuals, you understand that you're dealing with some really, really severe states of PTSD, or um, uh, traumatic stress disorder. And so capturing the data like they would with myself or yourself, Beata, which is like, tell me, and we can just fill it out on a clipboard, or fill it out whilst I'm looking at a screen and you look off into the beyond, isn't as easy, because you've got to stay engaged with these people, right? And so think about how you're capturing that data, and do you have the right tools to capture that data? And if not, who can you talk to create those tools so that you can engage in a far more appropriate way? And then the last thing is really just, how do you then, now that you're getting that information, how do you transform the programs in order to make those programs evolve in a relevant way? A lot of the time when we first engage with people, we find programs that were set up and they were great back in 1998, but it's 2023, and it's like, we're almost in 2024. It's 25 years old. You really need to update it. And so being able to change those programs with the data and information that you're getting is that third stage. And then, just working through those, obviously there are other things that people can do when, extra for experts. But if you're just starting through this and you're starting to think about how to apply technology to my organization, I think those three steps are really, really important for you to get your head around. So.
Fantastic. And your experience is on the organization side, or is it more on the technical side? Or has it developed from the start when you started your career?
So when I first entered into the tech industry, I was pretty much hands-on. But Nothing to the level that you would find. Like my son was 11, and he built his first application on Unity, you know,
Mm,
and nothing to that level, and I was already, a decade older than that, and so for me, getting into the tech industry was really about, you know, that level of curiosity and really scratching that itch of how does this thing work? How do you break it down? So there was an element of being on the tools. During my time at Microsoft, I was in the product groups, and so being able to understand how products are built, managed, and then the programs in which you bring those and they're not products that people have never heard of, and so you have this reputation that you've got to be able to you should know how that product works, and so you have to understand, not just the surface stuff. You had to understand the technological intricacies of how each of these products worked, and also how they came together. So that was my background, and I sort of fell into it. Today, though, I use that background, use that understanding of 11 years of product, 4 years of managing our the global tech support center for Microsoft, tier 1 and tier 2 support. So learning things as I went, no longer having to do that stuff, but now being able to sit down with the likes of an organization and being able to just listen to the problems. And sometimes it's very difficult, when you're working in this space, because a lot of the stuff that they talk about, not always, but sometimes it can get quite intense. And so you have to try and filter through that to try and understand. So what's the big issue here? Well, the big issue could be data encryption. Okay, so let's go away and let's figure out. I'll reach out to my good friend Scott, who runs our security team, and ask him if he can step in with a whole bunch of people, to help us to run some encryption software around this. And so it's having that background of technological understanding, to be able to then know how to apply that in the different situations. And I have to be honest, Beata, sometimes there is no solution, you
mm,
know, and sometimes you just have to be upfront and say, look, before we can even have this technology conversation, I think you need to go back and have a full-on conversation with all of your teams about how you want to do this, because technology is not the silver bullet. We can roll out any tech that you want, no problem. That's easy.
mm,
But if your team don't want to use this, if your team don't see that you actually have an issue that needs resolving, and we can provide this to help you, and your team doesn't see the value of that, there's
mhm.
no point doing this. So sometimes we have those conversations, but thankfully not as often. So yeah.
Great. Well, as we know, it's so easy to plug in, but it's so difficult to convince those who are. It's always been done this way. We always took notepads to convince them to actually switch into the digital world and start using whatever you plugged in.
Hmm.
So technology can also serve as higher purpose by empowering and enabling those who are underprivileged and dramatically altering their lives for the better. Is there any project you're especially proud of, and you could tell us the story?
Um, yeah, I, oof, um, yeah, there's a whole bunch of projects. In fact, there are some active projects that we have running at the moment. I think, um, there are some projects that are rather sensitive, at the moment. So um, uh, if certain teams happen to see this video or happen to see this podcast and get upset about their project not being um, uh, called out, know for a fact that it was because of that reason. So um, I think there have been a number of projects that we've worked on in the past, and I go back to, I think, one of the big projects that really stood out for me and I guess motivated me to really get into this tech for social good. And this was long before I even knew it existed. I'm talking sort of maybe 2012, 2013, and we were in and we had been talking about the whole uh, um, notion of free Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
You know, connectivity is not a privilege; it should be a right. You know, as long as that and that was the whole premise that myself and my team were working on at the time, and one of the things that we wanted to do was really think about how do we. So then, if we believe that, what sort of technology do we implement in order to be able to make that a reality? And so, one of the things that we were looking at was some recently developed technology. I think Cambridge had been running it. We had run it in a number of geographies over in Middle East Africa. And so then we were looking at how do we run that over here in Asia Pacific, and this was the whole TV white spaces. So the conversion of of TV channels or TV frequencies into broadband. And I think for those who aren't familiar, so it's taking the UHF signal and being able to convert that, to broadband. I think each channel equates to up to a maximum of 8 megs. So it's not high speed broadband, but we're talking about being able to reach parts of a country where there is no backhaul, there is no fiber, there is no copper, there's nothing. But typically, when you're driving along the outskirts, you can still see lights blinking in the darkness, and you know that the TV signal is still able to reach there. And so the ability to be able to provide some type of Wi-Fi connectivity to the outskirts of a community, I think was a real game changer. It was a game changer for me because, I didn't realize just how important it was, to be able to reach, let's say fishing communities who otherwise would just sometimes go out and fish and catch all this fish, which then would just go rotten because there was no connection between the produce or the product and a market. And but on a more serious note, because we weren't registering some of the fisheries, and this was during my time in Southeast Asia, because we weren't registering some of the fishing folk, there was the chance that they would just disappear and we wouldn't know, who was gone and how long they'd been gone, et cetera, et cetera. So, that was a project that was really exciting for me. I can honestly say that was probably the project that sort of flicked the switch for me, that made me think, actually, how many more technologies are available today that could be a simple solution for some communities out there who are looking for some help or some support. So,
Mm.
yeah.
So, in terms of impact, is there any project that you have seen that had a major impact in the local community? Not just in terms of accessibility, but also in terms of improving their quality of life.
There is a current project that we're working on at the moment, which really looks at, and I think, just to set the scene a bit, I think part of the challenge that we have at the moment is we are trying to create a paradigm shift around, um, you know, I guess climate control and climate change, etc. And being someone who is from the South Pacific, I think it's no secret to anyone really that some of the most heavily impacted, or one of the most heavily impacted regions when it comes to climate change is in the South Pacific. And so one of the projects that we're working on, and it's not just Crayon, it's not just us, we're collaborating with some other organizations. Institute for the Future out of California is out of Silicon Valley is part of the project Tamarix, which is a fledgling startup, and the whole purpose there is to create what we call a futures office. What a futures office does is it actually starts to do future forecasts around anywhere up to 10 to 15 years based on an environmental issue or around a particular industry or whatever topic it is that you're wanting to do, by looking at signals, indicators, and also using, I think it's 28 different models to actually model out what this might look like. The reason why I think this is going to be have a major impact is because unless you understand the South Pacific, this isn't necessarily something that would typically happen, because it's the what we in the South Pacific often do is we'll look ahead to maybe a week, a year, or 3 years, and potentially 5 years max. But what we're trying to do is really create this paradigm shift, as I said, to think about, what is the impact of, let's say, 1 degree change, 1 degree uplift on the surrounding seas? What happens to the fish, to the species that your island nation, your independent island nation, um, catches within that catchment? What is the shift? What is the change? How do you forecast that? How do you look for the signals and indicators and prepare yourselves? Because the whole purpose of this forecasting exercise isn't about prediction, it's about preparation. So, how do we prepare these island nations for the next 10 to 15 years? And so, hence the reason why I was saying before, it's a real paradigm shift, because oftentimes it's sort of thinking through, yeah, but let's focus on what we can control. We can potentially control the next 1, 2, 3 years, but you're talking about 10 to 15 years, Tovia. That's a bit of a stretch, but it's helping them to understand. It's helping people to understand, look, we're not trying to predict the future, and it's not about, yes, I got it right, or silly me, I got it wrong. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is, if these are the potential outcomes, how do we prepare for that? How do we prepare a growing generation that's coming through and allow them to think about new ways of approaching climate change? And so it really is something that we're working hard on. We're starting in Samoa, we're working our way right through the South Pacific, and I've been very privileged to be able to be a part of this and take this, give back to my home, back to the region where I was born, where I came from, because I know that a lot of our forecasts, a lot of the future thinking of our region comes from everywhere but us.
Mm.
And so our aim is to bring this back, allow, people on the ground to be able to create a forecast so that we can start to merge it with everything else that's coming in. So
Well, the choices we make today shape the world, and our families will be living in the future. And that's why we run our Women on IT community, because we
mm,
want to improve the global economy by bringing more women and underprivileged and
awesome.
mm, overseen minorities into the world of technology. So
Mm,
I know, Tovia,
mhm.
that you're very creative. And how has creativity helped you shape the person you are and the person who is helping communities?
Um, I have a very creative family. So my wife is a full-time artist, and so I think if you were to ask my children, we have four children. If you were to ask them where do they get their creativity from, I'm pretty confident they'll say it's not from me. But I, you know, I think the whole approach around technology for me has been one of creativity. To your point, Beata, I think anyone who works in this industry, they may not think of themselves as someone who's creative, but in order for you to come up with a solution, and oftentimes it's bespoke, it's a one-off, it's not necessarily out of the box, it's something that you have to adjust and tweak. That can only be done if you're thinking creatively about how to apply a solution. And so when I think back um, to how I grew up. We grew up, and I'm one of six siblings, and we didn't have much when we were growing up, and I think if you speak to most people in my community, they'll tell you the stories of I distinctly remember my mum. She would start work at 7:30, work right through till 4:30, come home, make dinner, then go out and she'd work a second job that was from 8 through to I think 11, and then she'd come home and then she'd start her third job, which was cleaning.
Mm.
And I think that was from 4 to 5:30, and it was, and then it was just, and that was to help people to understand that what where I sit today is not because of anything that I did. It was because there were so many people that went before me that were doing so much more that allowed me to actually um, push ahead. And so because we didn't have much, we had to think very creatively about how we do things. Think creatively about how we keep ourselves entertained. And so sitting down um, with pen and paper suddenly became, you became a pretty good artist by the end of that, because everyone else was doing other things and you was like sitting there just drawing, like, oh
Uh,
great. But it is what it is, and I'm grateful for it, so
oh, absolutely. Being brought up with the minimum resources definitely makes you more curious and more, you have more time to think how to tinker about things. Not necessarily, you can't go to a shop and buy something, you have to
yeah,
replace it with something else.
yeah.
So, Tovia, uh, we know that all these projects have to be bespoke. Was there any project that was particularly challenging,
Mm,
uh, that you knew that it's going to be difficult and you're not sure whether the impact will be
mm.
sustainable, lasting for longer?
Yeah, I'm just, there were uh, there typically when we're working in these types of projects, we work on a time horizon of anywhere between 6 to 9 years. And the reason why we do that is because um, we know that technology will develop, and we also know that it's not just about the technology that's implemented; it's about the learning curve that is applied to the people who manage the technology. So you might have someone who's working there, and then for whatever reason, 2 years later, they're gone. But how have we transferred that knowledge, or how has that organization transferred that knowledge to the next person? And will they do a great job in managing it, and so on and so forth? And so for us, when we're running these projects, we try and work to a 6 to 9 time horizon, knowing that by then we are most confident, we're highly confident we are not uncertain that the technology would have changed or the technology would have improved or evolved. Having said that, not every project has ever, I would be lying to say that every project you implement, happens swimmingly with no issues whatsoever. And I think that's where, great project teams, and I have to say, I'm again very blessed to be working with some amazing people. I've got a guy named Armin Hall who used to be a professor in one of the top universities in Australia, but he runs our AI team, and he has PhDs all over his team that help us to implement some amazing projects. I've got a guy who works with me, David Bergendahl, who amazing guy who does all this stuff and around AI and the implementation of artificial intelligence into things like monitoring forest, sub canopies, or what monitoring for deforestation, all of this stuff. And then in his spare time, he goes off and he runs AI for Good.Asia in order to help people implement AI into their project. So, that's why I say when the teams that I work with, aren't just people who do this because they get paid to do it. It's actually in the blood, and they don't make this distinction between this is paid work, this is not. They do it because we do it because we know that it's going to help someone, it helps the community, etc., etc. And so we have all these people, coming back to your question, we have all these people who are part and parcel of implementation of these amazing projects. And so it does have its hiccups sometimes. And I think you alluded to it before, which is often the common issue where we're trying to explain the importance or the value that technology will bring to the situation. But some people are just so stuck. Or that they find change very difficult, and so we don't we made a decision right up front that we would never be the people that go, well, either you like it or you leave. So we spend more time educating, communicating, until people, and I would probably say 99% of the time that works, and I love what you said, empathy. When we have empathy, man, our projects just go so well. But it also means that when we're hiring people, and we don't see that little gene or that little chromosome of empathy coming through during the language and the conversation and the interactions, yeah, we steer a wide berth around that candidate. It's so critical.
It is indeed very critical, but also I think in any NGO, any organization, what is critical is finding a great leader, especially when it comes to managing volunteers. So, what qualities you see in some of the best leaders that you want us to focus on?
Oh, yeah. I think one of the things that I always marvel at, and I'm always amazed when I'm, earlier this year, I had the opportunity to actually do a bit of a tour, and I spent time with, I think my team did the tally. We spent time with 108 nonprofits, right? And one common thing that came out was just the level of confidence, and absolute confidence. And it was a confidence that permeated not just themselves, and it wasn't arrogance. It was a confidence and a belief that what they were doing would make a difference. And it was a belief in the team that they had would make a difference. And so that was really that was something that really stood out to me in amongst all the different conversations. I think um, that level of confidence, because having said that, there there were a handful of experiences that I had where there was a lack of confidence in the leaders that I was speaking to, and that didn't necessarily um, manifest itself obviously to people, right? Whereas for me, I believe I'm good at reading people. My wife says I'm good at reading people, and one of the things that I saw was, when people overcompensate, it comes out in different. It might come out in your language, it might come out in your actions, but it oftentimes comes out in some sort of demonstrated behavior. and and so then it was very clear, it was very obvious when you met a leader that was confident, quiet confidence, versus someone who was like, quite loud and quite, you know and quite forceful, and you're like going, okay, it's all right, you can be the alpha of the room, it's okay, we're not, we're okay with this,
Mhm.
and so that part was important. Communication, I think, the greatest leaders that and I don't think it's isolated to nonprofits. I think it's across any realm. Um, Communication is key as well. So yeah.
Great communication is definitely coming together with confidence, and then you have
Mm.
the recipe for a perfect leader. What is your recipe, though, Tovia, for problem solving?
For problem solving, I think for me, problem solving is, and not to oversimplify it, but it's um, and anyone who knows me will say the same thing. I like to break everything right down, um, to try and make sure that I understand exactly what's going on, because if your problem statement is wrong, um, it means that you don't quite understand the entire situation. Well, that's the first thing, but it also means that the solution you develop isn't going to work. So understanding the problem, understanding the realities, evidence, advantages, disadvantages. So read, um, is important, because then once you've got your read right, then you can start to think about, okay, then, so what are the steps, to some type of resolution, if it's a resolution that you're trying to a solution that you're trying to implement. And then, like, even anything that I do, like when I'm building something, when I'm renovating, whatever, I'll, you'll, if you walk past the wall, you'll see that I've actually written down the steps on the wall, so that I've committed it to memory. And so, yeah, problem solving for me is breaking it down. Um, the whole concept around read, which was something that I just came up for because it worked for me, understanding the realities, understanding what evidence reflect the realities, because sometimes what you think is reality actually isn't. So
Mm.
finding the evidence to prove the reality, understand the advantages of that, and understanding the disadvantages, and then once you've got all of that, then start to think about, okay, so if that's my read on the situation, what do I do from here, right? So
Well, speaking about reads, what is the number one book you wish you read before you started your career?
that's easy. So it's the book that I make all my kids read, called Creator's Code by Amy Wilkinson. It taught me more about, just having the right level of energy when you're engaging in different situations. Yeah, if
Mm.
I had read that when I wish I could go back and tell my 21-year-old self, coming into the tech industry, hey, hurry up and read that book. So
I think you did quite well, even without reading that book, Tovia. But now, speaking about inspiration, perspiration, can you give us your life lesson quote and how did it impact you?
Um, yeah, it's easy. My one is humility is the only diet for a fat head.
Hmm.
And so I think a lot of the time, you know, I think if we all walked into a room with a level of humility, I think things would would go a lot better, in my view. And again, it's all part and parcel of what you referred to before around empathy, being able to be more understanding towards others and not thinking too much of yourself. I
Hmm.
think that's important. So,
Hmm. So, Tovia, you mentioned a couple of times your upbringing.
mm.
What was the situation there? Were you raised in Philippines, or where are you coming from?
So we were part of the migration wave out of the South Pacific into New Zealand
Hmm.
back in the 1970s, and at the time, I came from a family. My father and his brothers were all part of law enforcement, um, and so you've got this whole generation that left our the Samoa, and we
Hmm.
moved to New Zealand. And so he came from Samoa, being someone who was on track to becoming a police commissioner, to then working in a factory, in a paint factory, and it was, we didn't have much, as I mentioned before, and so we were just trying to figure out how to how to make ends meet. And it was a very tense environment, as you might imagine. It was high stress, and there was always sort of just a lot of the time for us we were walking on eggshells, because just because of the financial situation that we're in. By no means were we, I was very, very, very aware that there were people who were in far worse situations than we were.
Hmm.
But I also knew of the fact that I was very aware of the fact that my parents had given up a lot in order for us to at least have a crack at this whole opportunity around better education, better employment, etc. So, yeah.
Well, you did well, thanks to your parents, and
Thanks.
I wonder whether you're visiting Samoa often, and how is it that experience?
It's my we took our children there in July this year, so not so long ago. I think, like most places around the world, COVID had a significant impact. Um, but like our time in the Philippines, what we found was that uh, the Filipino community is a resilient community. And you know um, and I just think that when push comes to shove, that they Samoans and Filipinos are very similar in that you just do whatever it takes to make things happen. And so um, what we observed whilst during our time in July in Samoa was that a lot of families had sent their loved ones to Australia and New Zealand to work, and then remit finances or funds back to Samoa. And so that has had an impact also, both a direct impact, more money coming back into the country, but an indirect impact is also the fact that because some people now have this extra cash flow, um, they're struggling to actually get people to come and work in the hospitality industry and all sorts of different things because of that additional surplus income that's coming in from overseas. So a few challenges there, and I'm sure, like most places, they'll figure out how to work through that. I know there are some amazing people over there who are doing some great things. I think the Annandales and the in Apia or in Upolu are doing some things, and there are different groups who are looking at how do we create sustainable environments within their communities. So yeah.
Well, I guess it's time for me to ask you
Mhm.
which place would you choose and what person would you choose to have a private breakfast with and have that time to reflect and discuss things that you like or doing or or things that you wish you have done.
Yeah. Um, I'm
Obviously, if you could travel anywhere in the world,
yeah.
where would it be, and who would you choose to travel
Um,
with?
I think I think um, the person would be my wife,
Mm.
and anywhere we go would be special. And I say that um, uh, if I could choose anyone, in the past, in the future, it would be her. And I think that's a testament to the fact that there's a lot that goes on, under the skin that um, has all been channeled in hopefully the right direction, and that's only been possible because of you know um, the work that she's done just to help me through a whole bunch of stuff. And so a lot of the time I travel a lot for work. In the last, I think, 9 weeks, I've been traveling for six. And so, and I know that the work that I do is meaningful to different communities, and wherever I go. And so, um, but none of that travel compares to when I actually travel with her. And so, and without children. But I know my children will grow up one day, and then it'll just be her and I. So I keep telling them, eventually it's just going to be me and mum. So you guys need to hurry up and figure out what you're doing. So yeah.
How old are your children?
Sorry, say again.
How old are they?
How old are the children? We have an 18-year-old who's getting ready to go to university. We have a 14-year-old boy, our only boy, our 13-year-old girl, and then our youngest is an 8-year-old. Our two youngest girls were born in the Philippines while we were living there, so they're our Pinay princesses. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, the internet is becoming the town square for the global village of tomorrow, as Bill Gates says. And I have to say, it's been really a pleasure to talk to you, Tovia. Thank you very much for
Mhm.
staying with us. Technology continues to be a primary catalyst for change in the world. Technology advances give businesses, governments, and social sectors institutions more possibilities to lift their productivity, invent and reinvent offerings, and contribute to humanity's well being, wrote McKinsey analyst Chu Roberts and T. And while it remains difficult to predict how technology trends will play out, executives can plan ahead better by tracking the development of new technologies and anticipating how companies, organizations, people may use it for social good. And that's it from episode 121 of PhD Livestream. Thanks to our guest, Tovia Va'aelua. And I would like to invite everyone to our next week's guest, which will be Tracy Bauer. She was a guest just 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, and she is going to be next week on Wednesday, 6 p.m. CET, 12 p.m. Midday in EST. To stay updated and ensure you never miss a positivity hack delivered for women on IT, and turn on notifications to be alerted once the video has been released. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Tovia, for staying with us late into the
Yeah.
night. And as always, our positivity quote comes from Positive Thinking Only. Hopefully, we inspire